The cold desert air bit at Florence McKenna's skin as she awoke with a start, her cheek pressed against the rough stone of a weathered tombstone. The year was 1876, and she found herself alone in the cemetery outside Willow Creek, Colorado, with no memory of how she'd gotten there. The morning sun cast long shadows across the burial ground as Florence's trembling fingers traced the engraved name on the stone. Eleanor Jenkins, beloved wife and mother, 1832–1875. "Madam, you all right?" A deep voice called from behind her. Florence turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. A man on horseback, his broad shoulders draped in a dusty duster, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She scrambled to her feet, swaying slightly as a wave of dizziness washed over her. "Easy now," the man said, dismounting in one fluid motion. As he approached, Florence could see his features' clearly strong jaw covered with stubble, kind eyes the color of a summer sky, and a concerned expression. "Name's Lucas Calloway. Found you sleeping here beside this tombstone." "Reckon that ain't no place for a lady to spend the night." Florence clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. I don't know how I got here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas studied her for a moment, then stepped closer, his boots crunching on the dry ground. "You're shivering, Miss McKenna, Florence McKenna," he nodded, removing his duster and draping it gently around her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled of leather, tobacco, and horse. "Miss McKenna, I don't mean to be forward, but you'll never sleep alone again if I have anything to say about it. No decent woman should be left to fend for herself in a graveyard." He gestured toward his horse. "Let me take you into town, get you some hot food and proper shelter." Florence hesitated, glancing back at the tombstone. Something about it seemed important, though she couldn't place why. "I can't leave yet. I need to remember why I'm here." Lucas's expression softened. "Then I'll wait with you, Miss McKenna, but first let me build a fire." Dawn's breaking, but the morning's still mighty cold. Within minutes, Lucas had gathered enough dry brush to start a small fire. Florence sat on a flat rock nearby, watching as he worked efficiently, his movements sure and practiced. When the flames began to dance, he settled beside her, not too close to be improper, but near enough that she could feel the reassuring presence of another human being. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked, reaching into his saddlebag to produce a small parcel wrapped in cloth. Florence frowned, trying to recall. Her memory felt like Swiss cheese full of holes. "I don't know," she admitted. "Yesterday, perhaps, or the day before." Lucas unwrapped the parcel, revealing jerky and hardtack. "It ain't much, but it'll keep your strength up." He handed her a piece of each, then pulled out a canteen. "Got some water, too." As Florence ate, the first tentative threads of memory began to return. "I came from Boston," she said suddenly. 3 weeks ago, my father died and I learned I had an aunt living out here." Lucas nodded encouragingly. "Go on." "She wrote to me after Father's funeral, said I should come west, that there was nothing left for me in Boston." Florence took a sip of water from Lucas's canteen. "I arrived in Willow Creek 2 days ago, but when I asked about Aunt Margaret, nobody seemed to know her." "Margaret McKenna?" Lucas asked, his brow furrowing. "Can't say I recall anyone by that name in these parts, but Willow Creek's growing fast, new folks arriving every month." Florence shook her head. "Not McKenna, Margaret Jenkins, my mother's sister." Lucas's gaze shifted to the tombstone Florence had been sleeping against, and she followed his eyes. "Eleanor Jenkins, the stone read. Could there be a connection?" "Miss McKenna, I don't wish to upset you, but Jenkins is a common enough name," Lucas said gently. "And this cemetery's been here since before the war. Might just be coincidence." But Florence wasn't listening. Another memory surfaced, a woman's face, aged but kind, smiling as she handed Florence a cup of tea. "I met her," Florence whispered. "I found her house on the edge of town. She welcomed me, told me she'd been expecting me." Lucas frowned. "And then," Florence pressed her hands to her temples. "I can't remember. We talked. She showed me a photograph of my mother, then nothing, just waking up here." The The sun climbed higher in the sky as they spoke, warming the cemetery. Lucas added more kindling to the fire, then stood, stretching his long frame. "Miss McKenna, I don't mean to press you, but we should head into town. Maybe seeing your aunt's house again will jog your memory." Florence nodded, rising unsteadily. Lucas was at her side in an instant, his arm supporting her elbow. The touch, though proper, sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Can you ride?" he asked, leading her toward his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding with a white blaze down its face. Yes, it's been some time, but I can manage." Lucas helped her mount, then swung up behind her. Florence stiffened slightly at the proximity, but as they rode away from the cemetery, she found herself grateful for his solid presence at her back. As they approached Willow Creek, the town came alive with morning activity. Shopkeepers swept their storefronts, a blacksmith hammered at his forge, and wagons rumbled down the main street. Several people nodded at Lucas as they passed, but their gazes lingered curiously on Florence. "Folks don't mean to stare," Lucas said near her ear. "Just not often they see a Boston lady riding double with the town marshal." Florence turned slightly surprised. "You're the marshal?" Lucas chuckled. "Going on 3 years now, not much crime in Willow Creek, but enough to keep me busy." He guided his horse down a side street. "Now, can you point out your aunt's house? You said it was on the edge of town." Florence scanned her surroundings, trying to recall the path she'd taken 2 days earlier. Nothing looked familiar until they reached a fork in the road. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a narrow dirt path that wound away from town. "Her house is down that way, a small cabin with blue shutters." Lucas turned his horse onto the path. They rode in silence for several minutes, the town receding behind them. Just as Florence began to worry she'd misremembered, a cabin came into view. But as they approached, her heart sank. The shutters weren't blue but a faded gray, and the cabin itself appeared abandoned, its door hanging off one hinge. "Are you certain this is the place?" Lucas asked as he helped her dismount. Florence stared at the cabin, confusion etched across her face. It looked different, well kept. There were flowers in the window boxes. She walked toward the building, drawn by some inexplicable need to understand. Lucas tied his horse to a nearby post and followed her. "Be careful, Miss McKenna. Structure might not be sound." The door creaked ominously as Florence pushed it open. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the gloom through broken windows. The cabin was a single room with a stone fireplace, a small table, and a bed frame with no mattress. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. "No one's lived here for years," Lucas said softly from behind her. Florence shook her head, tears pricking at her eyes. "But I was here. She made me tea. We sat at that table." She pointed to the rickety piece of furniture in the corner. Lucas stepped further into the cabin, his boots leaving prints in the dust. He examined the fireplace, running a finger along the mantel. Cold, no ashes either. He turned to face her, his expression troubled. "Miss McKenna, I don't doubt what you're saying, but—" "You think I'm lying?" Florence felt a flare of indignation despite her confusion. "No, madam, I think you believe what you're saying." "But this place has been abandoned since old man Jenkins died 5 years back." Florence felt the blood drain from her face. "Jenkins?" Lucas nodded. "Ezra Jenkins and his wife, Eleanor. They were among the first settlers in Willow Creek. After Ezra passed, Eleanor lived here alone until her death last year. Their daughter Margaret left for California during the gold rush. Never came back." Florence sank onto a 3-legged stool, her mind reeling. "Margaret Jenkins, my aunt, but if she left for California." "And Eleanor Jenkins is buried in the cemetery," Florence finished, the pieces finally connecting. "The tombstone I was sleeping against, but why would I be there? And who was the woman I spoke to?" Lucas knelt in front of her, his eyes filled with concern. "I don't know, Miss McKenna. But I aim to help you figure it out." He offered her his hand. "Come on, let's get you to town, get some proper food in you, and then we can sort through this mystery." Florence hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and reassuring. As they stepped back into the sunlight, she felt a curious mix of fear and hope. She was lost in more ways than one, but something about Lucas Calloway made her believe she might find her way. The ride back to Willow Creek was quiet, each lost in their thoughts. Lucas guided his horse toward a two-story building with a sign that read Willow Creek Hotel and Dining Room. "Mrs. Abernathy runs the place," he explained as he helped Florence dismount. "She's a good woman. We'll give you a fair price on a room and won't ask too many questions." Inside, the hotel was modest but clean. A plump woman with graying hair looked up from behind a small desk, her eyebrows rising at the sight of Lucas escorting a disheveled woman. "Marshal Calloway," she greeted, her curious gaze shifting to Florence. "Who might this be?" "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Florence McKenna. She's new to town and in need of a room." Lucas's tone was casual but carried an undercurrent of authority that brooked no argument. Mrs. Abernathy seemed to understand. She smiled warmly at Florence. "Of course. I have a lovely room on the second floor overlooking the street. Will you be staying long, Miss McKenna?" Florence glanced at Lucas, uncertain how to answer. "At least a few days," he interjected smoothly. "Miss McKenna is investigating a family matter." Mrs. Abernathy nodded, reaching for a key hanging on the wall behind her. "Room 203. Breakfast is served from 6 to 8, dinner from 5 to 7. Baths extra, but I can have hot water brought up whenever you like." Florence realized with a start that she had no money. Her reticule, if she'd ever had one, was gone. "I am afraid I can't. Put it on my account for now," Lucas said quietly. "We can settle up later." Mrs. Abernathy handed the key to Florence with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Marshal's good for it. Though folks might talk, seeing as he's never sponsored a lady before." Florence felt her cheeks heat. "It's not we're not," Lucas cleared his throat. "Miss McKenna is a respectable woman in need of assistance, Mrs. Abernathy, nothing more to it than that." The older woman nodded, though her expression remained skeptical. "Of course, Marshal. Will you be joining us for breakfast, Miss McKenna? Kitchen's still serving for another half hour." Florence's stomach rumbled at the mention of food. "Yes, thank you." Lucas touched the brim of his hat. "I'll leave you to get settled, Miss McKenna. Have to make my rounds. But I'll come by this afternoon if that's acceptable. We can continue our investigation." Florence nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Thank you, Marshal Calloway, for everything." After he left, Mrs. Abernathy showed Florence to her room, small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the town's main street. Once alone, Florence sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. She should clean up, change clothes. But she had no clothes to change into, she realized. Everything she owned had vanished along with her memory of the past 2 days. A knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Mrs. Abernathy stood there with a bundle in her arms. "Thought you might need these," she said, placing the items on the bed. "Just some basic necessities: nightgown, a spare dress, toiletries. They belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Denver." Florence was touched by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you. I'll pay you back as soon as I can." Mrs. Abernathy waved away her concern. "Any friend of the Marshal's is a friend of mine. Besides, we women have to look out for each other out here. West isn't always kind to those without connections." She paused, studying Florence. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you come to know Marshal Calloway?" Florence hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "We only just met this morning. He found me, lost, helped me when no one else was around." Mrs. Abernathy nodded, her expression softening. "That sounds like Lucas. Always was one to help a soul in need." She moved to the door. "Come down when you're ready for breakfast, and if you need anything else, just ask." After Mrs. Abernathy left, Florence used the water in the pitcher to wash her face and hands. The cool water revived her somewhat, and after changing into the borrowed dress, a simple blue cotton that was a bit loose but otherwise serviceable, she felt almost human again. In the dining room, she ate her first proper meal in what felt like days. Eggs, bacon, and biscuits with gravy. As she ate, she tried to piece together the fragments of her memory. She remembered the journey from Boston clearly enough: the train to St. Louis, then the stagecoach to Denver, and finally the local coach to Willow Creek. She remembered arriving at the small station, asking directions to Margaret Jenkins's house, and being met with blank stares. But then she'd found the cabin, and a woman who claimed to be Margaret had welcomed her. They'd talked about Florence's mother, about Boston, about the journey west. The woman had served tea and then what? Florence's mind went blank, the memory cutting off as sharply as if someone had taken scissors to it. After breakfast, Florence returned to her room to rest. Despite her confusion and fear, exhaustion pulled her into a deep sleep. She dreamed of the cemetery, of standing before Eleanor Jenkins's grave while a woman who looked remarkably like Florence's own mother watched from the shadows. "She wasn't supposed to find you," the woman said, her voice echoing strangely. "You weren't supposed to remember." Florence tried to ask who she was, what she meant, but no sound emerged from her throat. The woman stepped closer, reaching out a hand that seemed to pass through Florence's arm like smoke. "You carry her blood," the woman whispered. "Our blood, the debt must be paid." Florence woke with a gasp, her heart pounding. Sunlight streamed through the window, indicating she'd slept most of the day. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss McKenna," Lucas's voice called. "Are you all right?" Florence rose shakily, smoothing down her borrowed dress before opening the door. Lucas stood there, hat in hand, concern written across his features. He'd changed into a clean shirt and jacket, his marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. "I'm sorry," she said, suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance. "I fell asleep." Lucas smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "No need to apologize. You've been through a lot. Thought you might be ready for some dinner, though. Mrs. Abernathy's roast beef is renowned in 3 counties. As they descended to the dining room, Florence told Lucas about her dream. He listened attentively, his brow furrowing. "Blood debts aren't something to take lightly in these parts," he said as they settled at a table. "Lot of old feuds out west, some dating back to the war, some even older. But I don't understand what debt my family could possibly owe. I'd never even heard of the Jenkins family until I received that letter after my father died." Lucas signaled to a serving girl, who brought them plates heaped with roast beef, potatoes, and greens. "Tell me about your parents," he suggested as they began to eat. Florence cut into her beef, the rich aroma making her mouth water. "My father was Edward McKenna, a banker in Boston. My mother was Elizabeth Jenkins before she married. She died when I was 10 in 1866. She paused, the connection suddenly obvious. "Jenkins. Could she have been related to Eleanor and Margaret?" Lucas nodded. "Seems likely, though Jenkins isn't an uncommon name. Mother never spoke of her family out west. Father always said she'd left that life behind when she came east." "Many do," Lucas said. "The frontier life isn't for everyone." He took a sip of coffee. "After dinner, I think we should visit the town records office. Might find some information about your family there." As they finished their meal, Florence noticed several diners watching them with undisguised interest. "People are staring," she murmured. Lucas smiled wryly. "Small town. Marshal dining with an unknown lady is bound to start tongues wagging. I'm sorry if I'm causing you trouble. Don't fret about it. Been causing trouble in this town long before you arrived." His eyes twinkled with mischief, and Florence couldn't help but smile in return. The records office was closed by the time they finished dinner, so Lucas suggested a walk instead. As they strolled down the main street, the setting sun casting long shadows across the dusty road, Florence found herself relaxing in his company. "How did you become marshal?" she asked as they passed the jailhouse, a squat building with barred windows. Lucas's expression grew thoughtful. "Was a Union soldier during the war. After it ended, didn't have much to go home to in Illinois. Drifted west, worked as a ranch hand, then a deputy in Denver. When Willow Creek needed a marshal 3 years back, seemed as good a place as any to settle down." "Do you have family?" "Parents passed before the war. No siblings, no wife." He glanced at her, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. Always figured there'd be time for that later. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the town quieting as dusk deepened into night. Florence was struck by how at ease she felt with this man she'd known less than a day. There was something solid about Lucas Calloway, something trustworthy that went beyond his marshal's badge. As they turned back toward the hotel, a figure emerged from the shadows of an alley. Florence gasped, recognizing the woman from the cabin from her dream. Up close, the resemblance to Florence's mother was even more striking. The same high cheekbones, the same deep-set eyes, though this woman's hair was streaked with gray. "You shouldn't have brought her to town, Marshal," the woman said, her voice carrying the same eerie quality it had in Florence's dream. Lucas stepped slightly in front of Florence, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Madam, I don't believe we've been introduced." The woman ignored him, her gaze fixed on Florence. "You were meant to sleep there beside her, to pay the debt." Florence felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What debt? Who are you?" The woman's lips curved in a mirthless smile. "I'm the one who called you here, niece." "The one your mother betrayed." "Margaret Jenkins," Florence breathed. Lucas frowned. "Miss Jenkins, if that's who you are, you're causing distress to this lady. I suggest you explain yourself plainly or move along." Margaret's gaze shifted to Lucas, her eyes hardening. "This isn't your concern, Marshal. Family business." "Miss McKenna is under my protection," Lucas said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "That makes it my concern." Margaret seemed to shrink slightly, her momentary defiance fading. "Elizabeth stole what was mine," she said, her voice suddenly weary. "She went east with our mother's locket, the only valuable thing our family owned. It was meant for me, the oldest daughter, but she took it and never looked back." Florence shook her head, confused. "A locket." "That's what this is about. My mother never had a locket, at least not that I remember." "She sold it," Margaret hissed. "Sold our legacy to that banker she married. Your father." Lucas's hand remained on his gun, but his voice was calmer now. "Miss Jenkins, even if what you say is true, it doesn't explain why Miss McKenna woke up in a cemetery, or why you pretended to welcome her to a cabin that's been abandoned for years." Margaret's eyes slid away, unable to meet Lucas's direct gaze. "I needed her close to Mother. Needed to bind her to our land." She looked back at Florence, a hint of regret crossing her features. "You have her face, you know, Elizabeth's face. When I saw you arrive in town asking about me, I couldn't help myself." "What did you do to me?" Florence demanded, anger finally overcoming her fear. "How did I end up at that grave?" "Just a little powder in your tea," Margaret said, almost apologetically. "Nothing harmful, enough to make you sleep while I took you to Mother. You were supposed to stay there to feel her pull. To give back what Elizabeth stole from us." Lucas stepped forward, his patience clearly at an end. "Miss Jenkins, I'm placing you under arrest for assault and attempted kidnapping." Margaret laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the quiet street. "You can't hold me, Marshal. I've done nothing that can be proven, and by morning I'll be gone from Willow Creek for good." Before either Lucas or Florence could respond, Margaret turned and disappeared back into the alley. Lucas moved to follow, but Florence caught his arm. "Let her go," she said softly. "She's right, we can't prove anything, and I just want to understand." Lucas hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "But I'm escorting you back to the hotel, and I'll have Deputy Evans keep watch tonight." As they walked back, Florence's mind raced. "A locket," she murmured. "Could that be what was in the envelope Father left me? The one I was supposed to open only after reaching Willow Creek?" Lucas looked at her sharply. "Envelope? Where is it?" Florence's hand went to her pocket, where she'd been keeping the small packet since leaving Boston. It was still there, somehow overlooked in whatever scheme Margaret had enacted. With trembling fingers, she pulled it out. "I was going to open it once I found Aunt Margaret," she explained. "But then everything happened so quickly." They paused under a street lamp, and Florence carefully broke the wax seal on the envelope. Inside was a folded letter, and nestled within it, a small gold locket on a delicate chain. "It exists," she whispered, holding up the necklace. The locket caught the light, revealing intricate engravings of flowers on its surface. Lucas stared at it. "Your father had it all this time." Florence unfolded the letter, her father's familiar handwriting bringing tears to her eyes. "My dearest Florence," she read aloud. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have traveled to Willow Creek as I instructed. With this letter, I return to you your mother's most prized possession, a family heirloom she brought with her from Colorado." Elizabeth never spoke much of her life before Boston, but in her final days she expressed regret at having left in such haste, taking the locket that rightfully belonged to her sister Margaret. "She made me promise that someday the locket would be returned. I could not bring myself to part with it while I lived, as it was my last connection to your mother. But now that duty falls to you. Find Margaret Jenkins, return the locket, and perhaps in doing so heal a wound that has festered for too long. With all my love, your father." Florence lowered the letter, tears streaming down her face. He knew, all this time he knew there was family here. Lucas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your mother must have had her reasons for leaving, and your father his reasons for keeping her secret." Florence opened the locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman who could only be her grandmother, Eleanor Jenkins, her eyes kind but determined, her hair arranged in the same style Florence's mother had worn. "What Margaret did was wrong," Lucas said firmly, "but perhaps her grievance was real." Florence nodded, closing the locket and clutching it tightly. "I need to return this to her. After what she did to you, Florence, she could have left you to die in that cemetery. But she didn't. She wanted me to feel connected to her mother, to my grandmother. In her twisted way, I think she was trying to welcome me back to the family I never knew I had." Florence looked up at Lucas, her resolve strengthening. "I need to do this, to fulfill my parents' last wish." Lucas studied her face, then sighed. "All right, but not tonight and not alone. Tomorrow we'll look for her together." They resumed walking toward the hotel, the night air cool against Florence's tear-stained cheeks. At the hotel entrance, Lucas paused. "I'll station Deputy Evans across the street tonight," he said, "just to be safe." Florence nodded, grateful for his protection but suddenly reluctant to part from him. "Marshal Calloway, Lucas, thank you for everything today." Lucas touched the brim of his hat, a small smile playing at his lips. "Just doing my job, Miss McKenna." "Florence," she corrected softly. "Please call me Florence." His smile widened. "Florence, then. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a new day." As she watched him walk away, Florence felt a curious lightness despite the day's revelations. She was still lost in many ways, but somehow, with Lucas Calloway by her side, she felt as though she might be finding a new path forward. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the spring air fragrant with wildflowers. Florence woke feeling refreshed, the locket still clutched in her hand. After dressing in her borrowed clothes and pinning her hair as neatly as possible with limited resources, she made her way downstairs. Lucas was waiting in the dining room, deep in conversation with a thin, mustachioed man Florence assumed was Deputy Evans. Both men stood as she approached. "Miss McKenna," Lucas greeted her, his eyes warming at the sight of her. "This is Deputy Sam Evans." The deputy tipped his hat. "Madam, Marshals told me about your situation. Rest assured we'll find this Margaret Jenkins and get to the bottom of things." "Thank you, Deputy," Florence said, taking a seat at the table. "But I hope we can resolve this peacefully. She is my aunt, after all." Evans looked dubious but nodded before excusing himself to continue his duties. Once he was gone, Lucas leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've been asking around town this morning," he said in a low voice. "Seems Margaret Jenkins returned to Willow Creek about a month ago, kept to herself mostly. Been staying at a boarding house on the far side of town. The woman who runs the place says Margaret left before dawn today, all her belongings with her." Florence's heart sank. "So she's gone, just like that?" Lucas shook his head. "Not necessarily. Station master says no one matching her description boarded the morning train. And the stage doesn't leave until tomorrow. My guess is she's still in the area." The cabin, Florence said suddenly. The Jenkins cabin, that's where she'd go. Lucas considered this. Possible, though it's not much of a hiding place if we already know about it. Not to hide, Florence explained, fingering the locket in her pocket. To say goodbye. If she's leaving Willow Creek for good, she'd want to visit her mother's home one last time. After a quick breakfast, they rode out to the abandoned cabin, Lucas again allowing Florence to share his horse. The familiar weight of his presence behind her was comforting as they followed the narrow path away from town. As they approached the cabin, Florence spotted a tendril of smoke rising from the chimney. "She's there," she whispered. Lucas nodded, bringing his horse to a stop a short distance away. "Let me go first," he said as he helped Florence dismount. "Just to be safe." Florence caught his arm. "No, let me talk to her alone, woman to woman, niece to aunt." Lucas frowned. "After what she did to you, I'll stay in plain sight," Florence promised. "If anything seems amiss, you can intervene." Lucas still looked unhappy but finally nodded. "All right, but I'll be watching." Florence approached the cabin, her heart hammering. The door stood partially open, and as she drew near, she could hear movement inside. Taking a deep breath, she called out, "Aunt Margaret, it's Florence, I'd like to speak with you." The movement inside ceased. After a long moment, Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face wary. "You brought the marshal," she said, glancing beyond Florence to where Lucas waited with his hand resting on his gun belt. "He's here for my protection," Florence said calmly, "but I came to talk and to give you something." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What game is this?" Florence reached into her pocket and withdrew the locket. It glinted in the morning sunlight as she held it out. "This belongs to you. Mother took it when she left. Father kept it after she died, but he always meant for it to be returned to you." Margaret stared at the locket, naked longing on her face. "How do I know it's real, that this isn't some trick?" "Look inside," Florence said. "There's a portrait of your mother." With trembling hands, Margaret reached for the locket. She opened it carefully, and at the sight of the portrait inside, a sob escaped her. "Mother," she whispered, tracing the tiny image with her fingertip. Florence watched as tears streamed down the older woman's face. "I'm sorry for what happened between you and my mother. I don't know the full story, but whatever it was, I hope this brings you some peace." Margaret clutched the locket to her chest, her earlier hostility melting away. Elizabeth was always the pretty one, the smart one. Mother doted on her. When she announced she was going east with your father, I was furious. I accused her of abandoning us. She took a shuddering breath. The night before she left, I said terrible things, that she wasn't part of our family anymore, that she was dead to us. Florence felt a pang of sadness for her mother, for the sister she'd left behind. "But she took the locket," Margaret nodded. "Mother gave it to her as a parting gift, said it would keep her safe in her new life." Her voice broke. "I was so angry, it should have been mine as the oldest. When Mother died last year, I found her letter explaining everything. How Elizabeth had written to her over the years. How she'd asked that the locket be returned to me someday. And so you sent for me," Florence said, understanding dawning. "You wrote, pretending to be my aunt welcoming me to Willow Creek." "I just wanted what was mine," Margaret whispered. "But when I saw you, looking so much like her, something broke in me. The old anger came flooding back. I wasn't thinking clearly." Florence stepped closer, her initial fear of this woman fading in the face of such raw grief. "I never knew my mother had family out west. Father kept it from me until his death." Margaret looked up, her tear-stained face softening slightly. "Elizabeth wrote about you in her letters to Mother. Said you had the Jenkins spirit, stubborn as a mule but loyal to the bone." Florence smiled at that. It sounded like something her mother would say. "What will you do now?" she asked. Margaret fastened the locket around her neck, her fingers lingering on the clasp. "Leave Willow Creek. Start fresh somewhere. There's nothing for me here anymore." "You have family," Florence said quietly. "You have me." Margaret looked startled, then skeptical. "After what I did, drugging you, leaving you in a cemetery, it was wrong," Florence agreed, "and frightening. But I understand desperation. And family. Family is precious. I've lost too much of mine already to turn away from what remains." For the first time, a genuine smile curved Margaret's lips. "You do have the Jenkins spirit." From behind them, Lucas cleared his throat. He'd approached while they talked, though he kept a respectful distance. "Everything all right here, Florence?" Florence nodded, touched by his concern. "Yes, Aunt Margaret and I have come to an understanding." She turned back to her aunt. "The marshal will need some assurance that you don't intend to cause any more trouble." Margaret straightened her shoulders, regaining some of her dignity. "I've done wrong, Marshal, and I'm prepared to face the consequences, but I hope we might resolve this without jail cells involved." Lucas studied her for a moment, then nodded. "No permanent harm done, as far as I can tell, and if Miss McKenna is satisfied with your apology, I'm inclined to let the matter rest provided you stay clear of sleight of hand with powders and potions from now on." "You have my word," Margaret said solemnly. As they rode back to town, Florence sitting behind Lucas this time, her arms wrapped around his waist, she felt a curious sense of completion. The mystery of her lost time had been solved, the locket returned to its rightful owner, and a family connection renewed, however tenuous. "What will you do now?" Lucas asked as they approached Willow Creek. "Return to Boston," Florence considered the question. Boston felt like another life, one she'd left behind when she boarded that train west. "No," she said finally. "There's nothing for me there anymore. My father's house has been sold, his affairs settled." She hesitated, then added, "I think I might stay in Willow Creek for a while. Get to know the place my mother came from." Lucas was silent for a moment. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear him over the horse's hooves, he said, "I'd like that." 3 months later, Florence stood in the cemetery, placing fresh wildflowers on Eleanor Jenkins's grave. The summer sun was warm on her shoulders as she straightened, surveying the peaceful burial ground. So much had changed since that cold morning when Lucas found her sleeping beside this tombstone. Margaret had left for San Francisco 2 days after their confrontation, but not before spending several hours with Florence, sharing stories of the Jenkins family and the sister she'd both loved and resented. She'd promised to write, and true to her word, a letter had arrived just last week, describing her new life in California. Florence had found work as a teacher in Willow Creek's small school, her Boston education making her well qualified for the position. She'd moved from the hotel to a small house near the schoolhouse, which she was slowly making her own. And Lucas had become a constant in her life, first as a protector, then as a friend, and finally as something more. Their courtship had progressed with the steady, unhurried pace that seemed to characterize everything about Lucas Calloway. Weekly dinners had become daily walks, which had led to quiet evenings on her porch, talking about everything and nothing. The town had watched with interest, then approval as the marshal and the schoolteacher grew closer. Even Mrs. Abernathy, initially skeptical, had become one of their most vocal supporters. "Thought I might find you here," a familiar voice called from behind her. Florence turned to see Lucas approaching, looking handsome in his Sunday best despite the dust of the cemetery path. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, which he placed next to Florence's, offering on the grave. "Paying my respects," he explained with a gentle smile. "If not for Eleanor Jenkins, I might never have found you that morning." Florence returned his smile, warmth blossoming in her chest. "A strange beginning to our acquaintance, wouldn't you say?" Lucas took her hand, his touch still sending that same thrill through her that it had the first time. "I meant what I said that day, you know, about you never sleeping alone again." His eyes, serious now, held hers. "I know it's only been 3 months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." From his pocket, he produced a small ring, a simple band with a modest diamond that caught the sunlight. "Florence McKenna, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears pricked at Florence's eyes as she looked from the ring to the man holding it. Lucas Calloway, who had found her at her most vulnerable and never once made her feel weak for it, who had protected her, supported her, and in the process stolen her heart completely? "Yes," she whispered, her voice strong despite her tears. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into an embrace that promised a lifetime of security and love, Florence glanced back at her grandmother's tombstone. Perhaps Eleanor Jenkins had guided her here after all. Perhaps this had been her destination all along. Lucas's words from that first morning echoed in her mind. "You'll never sleep alone again." Not a threat, but a promise one she knew with absolute certainty he would keep for all their days to come.